NCERT books are unavoidable to crack the IAS exam. Not only is the content of these books authentic, but these books also help a civil services aspirant to build conceptual clarity. And most importantly, lots of questions in the civil services examination are directly asked from NCERT books. But the aspirants often find it difficult to cover these books, or worse, they even end up ignoring these books. We at Unacademy IAS English are going to make the reading and understanding of the NCERT books easier. We present NCERT Fundamentals course, a free initiative of Unacademy IAS English. What are the highlights of this program? Comprehensive coverage of the most relevant NCERT books for the civil services exam. Prelims and mains practice questions in each session to test your understanding of the fundamental concepts. This course begins from 12th of July every day at 6 p.m. right here on our YouTube channel. Subscribe to the channel now. Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to a brand new series, NCERT Fundamentals. As you all know, NCERTs play a very important role in both UPSC prelims and mains. If you have seen the recent prelims question paper, you might have noticed that a number of questions, especially basic, standard, conceptual questions, were directly lifted from NCERT textbooks. So this is an attempt by Unacademy IAS English to help you simplify your NCERT preparation. We are going to take up certain important books from NCERT and narrow down some important chapters and topics and explain these topics comprehensively so that you can easily prepare for NCERT textbooks and thus benefit both in prelims and mains. So today I'll be starting with Political Science and International Relations. I'll be taking up the Class 12 textbook, Politics in India Since Independence. In this book, we have chapter number 4, which you can see over here, that deals with India's external relations. This chapter actually helps us lay a foundation for Indian foreign policy. It helps us understand some basic tenets, the core concepts and principles that define India's foreign relations. So let's begin the discussion by looking at what are we going to learn in this particular chapter. According to this summary provided by NCERT itself, this chapter will help us understand the context in which India's international relations were shaped starting from 1947, especially the foundational principles that were laid down under Prime Minister Nehru, which would continue to define India's foreign policy for the coming decades. The chapter also deals with India's complex relations and conflicts with neighbors such as Pakistan and China, and it also provides an overview of India's nuclear policy. In this session, the first class for PSIR, we are going to talk about the first two topics. We are going to discuss Prime Minister Nehru's contribution in laying the foundation for India's foreign policy. We will understand Nehru's principles and especially the concept of non-alignment, which was the driving factor of India's foreign policy in the initial years. Now, before we begin the discussion, we have a very important announcement. Based on popular demand, Unacademy has brought back the price discount on its online classroom program. Now you can access the comprehensive classes for prelims and mains taught by India's top expert faculties. And you can even get access to prelims and mains test series with answer evaluation, along with doubt clearance sessions and mentorship. This 15-month subscription will be available at just $24,999. And if you wish to enroll for the program, do contact the number provided on the screen over here. Do join the upcoming batch because the prices are going to increase by 10% in the next few days. So with this, let's get back to our discussion. So now, let's begin with the first topic, Nehru's principles and non-alignment, which would be the driver of India's foreign relations in the early decades. So I'll be starting right from the beginning. I'll be starting with India's independence, that is 1947. We will understand the context in which India became independent and what factors were driving India's foreign policy. But before we get into the details, you need to understand a very important concept from political science. See, when you look at international relations or foreign policy, many students have a wrong assumption that foreign policy is all about the external factors. While that is true to an extent, you need to note that even domestic factors, that is your internal factors, also play a deterministic role. They play a defining role in contributing to your foreign policy. The internal factors, the domestic factors within a country, even they play an important role in defining the foreign policy of a nation. It is as important as the external factors which are driving the foreign policy of a country. For example, let's say in a country like India, our economic situation, any crisis in, let's say, manufacturing or agriculture, it will have a direct impact on India's foreign relations. Or let's say the social stability in the country. This, of course, has a direct impact on India's foreign relations. So these domestic internal factors, they play a very critical role in defining a country's foreign policy, in fact, as important as the external factors. The policies of other countries, the developments happening outside of India, of course, they have a bearing on international relations and India's foreign policy. Similarly, the domestic internal developments also equally influence foreign policy. So this theoretical understanding is very crucial when we understand the context in which India's foreign policy foundation was laid down under Prime Minister Nehru. When India became independent in 1947, you all know that we gained independence from British rule under great difficult circumstances. The core principles of our freedom movement, from secularism to a united freedom struggle, it obviously reflected in post-independent India, and in the eventual constitution that was drafted, these principles were enshrined in the constitution as well. Similarly, those principles would find their way into our foreign policy as well and provide the foundation on which today our foreign relations have been built. Now, don't forget the global context as well. The world had just moved out of the World War era. So post-war era was a very challenging period for the entire global community. After the Second World War ended, by then there was large-scale destruction, damage, and human right violations and human rights situations that were developing. So the world was focused on reconstruction, especially Europe. The war-ravaged European continent was primarily focused on reconstruction, welfare, and there was also focus on dealing with the humanitarian situation. It was absolutely essential to establish peace and stability, to move away from wars, conflicts, and tensions. It was in this interest that a global organization called United Nations was established in 1945 to maintain peace and stability, to prevent conflicts, to diffuse any tensions, and also to assist in the reconstruction efforts and in the humanitarian efforts post-World War. So India, which became independent, its freedom struggle was driven by liberal values, progressive egalitarian values. Thanks to the leadership of our freedom fighters, from Mahatma Gandhi to Nehru to Sardar Patel to Subhash Chandra Bose to Bhagat Singh, all of them, even though they came from different ideological spectrums, they made a remarkable contribution to India's freedom struggle, and they would lay the foundation for a future India, a post-independent India. So post-colonial period, India did face a lot of struggle, internal struggle as well. Internally, our economy had been destroyed by years of colonial exploitation. Our native industries were decimated. India's agriculture had been destroyed. The handicraft industry had been decimated. India had become dependent on imports as well. So it was essential to rebuild our economy, starting with agriculture. There was a lack of food security. Famines were gripping the country. So addressing the problems in agriculture was of critical importance. Focusing on industrialization became a priority for the government as well. Plus, the task of drafting and framing the Indian Constitution and ensuring that we build a strong union by bringing all the princely states and the provinces together. These were some incredible challenges being faced by the first Indian government under Prime Minister Nehru, along with a very difficult global context. So internally, there were many princely states like the Nizam of Hyderabad, Nawab of Junagadh, who were trying to break away from the Indian Union. In the northeast, problems had already begun when the Naga National Council declared independence on its own and began the Naga insurgency. So in different parts of India, there were security problems, economic challenges, social problems created by the partition. Eventually, the independence of India was an outcome of the communal partition that the British carried out by dividing India and Pakistan on religious lines. And this division led to large-scale communal violence, and India was still recovering from the impact of the communal polarization and the communal riots. So internally, there were many challenges, and the government of India under Nehru had a very difficult task of stabilizing the country. This, of course, would have a bearing on our foreign policy as well. And externally, the Nehru administration was dealing with some incredible challenges as well. Apart from the global focus on reconstruction, welfare, and peace and stability, there was a Cold War which had started brewing between the two power blocs led by US and Soviet Union. The democratic capitalist states, primarily the Western countries under US and West European countries, they had aligned to form a power bloc which was opposed to the communist socialist power bloc led by the Soviet Union and the other communist states. This Cold War rivalry would only expand in the coming years, and it would pose a major risk and challenge to global peace and stability. It was in this context that India had to frame its foreign policy and ensure that India would become a beacon of hope for the global community to maintain peace and stability in a divided world. Now, if you look at the Indian Constitution that was eventually adopted in 1950, there is a very important article, Article 51, which is part of Directive Principles of State Policy. Article 51 mandates the Indian state to promote international peace and security. It says that the state shall endeavor to promote international peace and security, maintain just and honorable relations between nations, foster respect for international law and treaty obligations in dealings of organized people with one another, and encourage settlement of international disputes by arbitration. These four principles outlined in the Indian Constitution under DPSP, it clearly tells a lot about the foundation of Indian foreign policy. It made it very clear that India is not an aggressive power. We are not an expansionist state. We are looking to maintain peace and stability, promote security of the world, maintain free and friendly relations with every country, and more importantly, maintain respect for international law and international treaty obligations. So this would be the driving factor for the Nehru administration. By then, Prime Minister Nehru had been globally recognized as a statesman, as a diplomat, as a leader of a newly independent nation. So under Prime Minister Nehru's leadership, the foundational principle of Indian foreign policy was established, which is the principle of strategic autonomy. This remains the foundational principle of India's foreign policy even today. It essentially means that India will conduct its foreign relations independently. India's foreign policy would be autonomous. We would not be influenced by any other country or military clubs or alliances. We would not ally with any other power bloc or any other country to counter or rival other countries. We would not get into the business of dividing the world. Rather, India would be the glue that would bring the global community together. So to ensure this, it was critical to establish an independent foreign policy, and that is what Prime Minister Nehru did, one of his biggest contribution to India's foreign policy. In fact, here I would like to quote Jawaharlal Nehru himself. There is a small text that NCERT textbook carries as well. I've added the screenshot. Just read this statement by Prime Minister Nehru. What does independence consist of? What do you really mean by an independent nation? Nehru said, independence is fundamentally about independence in foreign policy. Because internally, locally, we will have our sovereignty. If we are not independent externally, if we can't conduct independent foreign relations, if we are subservient to another external power, then we are not truly independent. So Nehru's assessment was that for a country, independence basically meant autonomy in its foreign policy. Maintaining an independent foreign policy position was the core essence of being an independent nation, because that is how a sovereign nation can protect its core national interests. As long as you're under the influence of other powers, as long as big powers are pushing around your country, you can never really protect your core interests. So that is never true independence. So according to Nehru, independence meant having an independent, autonomous foreign policy, ensuring that we are not pushed towards US or Soviet Union, and navigate the divisions, the geopolitical divisions, and still maintain an independent stance on global issues. That is how India started navigating the world, by establishing the principle of strategic autonomy. Now, under Prime Minister Nehru, there were some top priorities, as I was mentioning. Internally, we had to focus on our unity, integrity, and sovereignty, ensure that we build a strong union, protect our borders, and create a strong union of India. There were different pulls and pressures, but India had to overcome those challenges and preserve the sovereignty of the nation and the unity and integrity of the nation. Next, preserve the territorial integrity, which was under attack. From Pakistan to insurgent groups were already posing a threat to India's territorial integrity. So dealing with these security issues became a priority for the Nehru administration. And finally, promoting rapid economic development, ensuring that we tackle the issues in agriculture, providing food security, ensuring that we focus on industrialization became priorities for the Nehru administration. And Nehru's understanding of global geopolitics was that India will not be able to focus on these priorities if we do not follow an independent foreign policy. So this led Prime Minister Nehru to initiate the policy of non-alignment. India became one of the champions of the principle of non-alignment, which even led to the establishment of the non-alignment movement. So when US and Western countries were leading the first world, the so-called first world, and Soviet Union and communist countries were leading the second world, it was India with few other like-minded countries that gave leadership to the third world. We established a middle path in global geopolitics through the principle of non-alignment. India showed that there is a third neutral path which is possible in a divided world in order to bring down the tensions and manage the Cold War geopolitics and ensure that we don't get into another global conflict. So in that regard, India's contribution was enormous, and the credit goes to the policy of non-alignment and the principle of strategic autonomy, which defined India's foreign policy. The world had been divided into military alliances. Western countries had formed the NATO military alliance. The communist states and the Soviet Union had formed the Warsaw Pact. So India decided that we will not enter such military clubs because that will contribute to increased tensions, which might result in wars and conflicts. So India carefully navigated between the two power blocks and decided not to join either of the power blocks. We decided to maintain friendly relations with both the sides. Non-alignment doesn't mean we'll not engage with US or Soviet Union. It meant we will work with US, we'll work with Western democracies as well. Of course, India itself was a democracy. It was only natural for us to work with other democratic states. Similarly, we will not abandon the communist states. We will work with the Soviet power bloc as well, because that is how India can benefit. So this policy served India very well from 1947 at least till 1971. But however, there are critics who point out that India was not truly non-aligned during this period. For example, during the 1956 Suez crisis, when Britain, with the support of few other countries, attacked Egypt over the Suez Canal issue, India came out publicly, criticized Britain and other imperial powers, and we opposed any such colonial imperial imposition. We even started supporting decolonization movements in Africa and other countries. But however, when Soviet Union attacked Hungary, when USSR invaded Hungary, India did not publicly condemn the Soviet action. So this led to a criticism that on one side India is preaching non-alignment, but in reality India is closely aligned with Soviet Union. That was one of the criticisms. But however, during these years from 1947 to 1971, principle of non-alignment, the policy of non-alignment did serve India well, as we could navigate the Cold War geopolitics, maintain good ties with both the sides. That is how we got assistance from US and Western countries, from Canada and other European countries. They helped us in agriculture, industrialization, nuclear research, even in defense and aerospace. We got support from Western democracies. Similarly, we got support from Soviet Union and other communist countries. Soviet Union would support India on the Kashmir issue. Soviet Union supported India when we liberated Goa from Portuguese colonization. So that is how India maintained the middle path and ensured that our national interests were protected while maintaining global peace and stability. Now, if you look at the background to the establishment of NAM or non-aligned movement, this was engineered by Prime Minister Nehru along with other like-minded leaders from Asia and Africa. Prime Minister Nehru, who believed in the principle of non-alignment, managed to bring around other world leaders who had a similar line of thought. For example, the then Egyptian leader, the legendary Gamal Abdel Nasser, President of Indonesia, Sukarno, who had received help from India in decolonization, Kwame Nkrumah, the leader of Ghana from Africa, and Joseph Tito from Yugoslavia in Europe. These leaders brought their countries together and they championed the non-aligned movement, which was established through the Bandung Conference of 1955. Prior to this, India had led the Asian Relations Conference in 1947. We spoke about Asian solidarity. We spoke about the need for decolonization and oppose imperialism and colonialism. Now, we brought African countries also into the fold and we held the Afro-Asian Conference, where all the former colonies of Asia, Africa were brought together at Bandung in Indonesia. And this Bandung Conference led to the establishment of the non-aligned movement in 1955. So at least till 1971, we remained strongly committed to the values of non-alignment and we maintained an independent foreign policy. So this is what we take away from this topic under the chapter India's External Relations in this class 12 textbook of NCERT. Now, before I wrap up my discussion, I would like to take up the practice questions that are provided by NCERT. We will make this a regular practice. At the end of the chapter, there are a few practice questions given. So let's take a quick look so that it will help you improve your answer writing skills. Look at this question. Why did Nehru regard the conduct of foreign relations as an essential indicator of independence? State any two reasons with examples to support your reading. So you can start your answer by talking about the statement of Nehru, where he stated that being independent essentially means running an autonomous foreign policy. Nehru was of the opinion that you're not truly independent if you can't run an independent foreign policy. That means if you are influenced by other countries, if other military blocs and other superpowers are forcing you to take a decision, then it essentially means your independence, your sovereignty has been compromised. So according to Nehru, true independence basically meant having autonomy, independence in foreign relations. That is how our core national interests can be protected. So bring out that analysis in the introduction, and in the body, you can justify, substantiate this argument by providing two reasons. For example, you can point out how India established a middle path in a world divided by Cold War geopolitics, how India contributed to the toning down of tensions and possibly prevented another major global escalation. You can also point out how India benefited by receiving aid and assistance from both the power blocks, be it the Western power bloc, be it the Eastern power bloc. Since we maintained decent relations with both the sides, we were able to secure aid and assistance, which was critical for ensuring the growth and development of India. So these two reasons explain why you should maintain an independent foreign policy. Then in the conclusion, try to provide a contemporary context. Try to bring in a contemporary angle and explain how even today India follows an independent foreign policy. Even though non-alignment has become outdated, India itself has reduced the significance given to NAM. Right? We have sidelined the NAM to an extent because today we have moved towards multi-alignment. Multi-alignment is about more proactive engagement with all the powers. Because in non-alignment, inevitably we were relatively closer to Soviet Union compared to the West. And as I pointed out, there was a lot of criticism regarding our non-aligned approach as well, that India was not really non-aligned because on some issues we were really siding with the Soviet Union. So India has moved out of this Cold War mindset. Eventually, non-alignment lost its relevance, especially in 1971, That is another interesting story that I'll be discussing in one of the coming sessions. We will discuss India-Pakistan, the wars between India-Pakistan. So with regard to 1971 conflict, there we will understand why India had to abandon non-alignment and how through the 80s and 90s, non-alignment lost its relevance, especially after the Cold War ended. Non-alignment has almost become outdated. India today follows a multi-aligned approach. We proactively engage with any country which can serve our interests. So this is a slightly different and more proactive approach as compared to non-alignment. So you can point out in the conclusion that today as well, we maintain strategic autonomy in our foreign policy. We have an independent foreign policy and give examples. Talk about India's position regarding Russia-Ukraine conflict, India's position on the Gaza war, how we have maintained a balanced position with regard to Israel and Palestine. Those are examples of India's independent foreign policy that shows how independent foreign policy can serve India's interests. So on this note, I would like to bring this discussion to an end. I hope you guys have liked the session, and if you have benefited, please press the like button. Don't forget to share your comments and do subscribe to our channel. That is it. I'll meet you in the next session.